Hey, what's up guys? So today I wanted to go over some pretty important settings that will optimize your gameplay regardless of what resolution that you're on, and also why I play on 2K resolution versus 1K resolution. Additionally, like the caveat between the two things that I'm going over is how to optimize 2K resolution, because in my opinion a lot of people should start moving towards that as their PCs get better and technology kind of advances over time. And after seeing the performance difference between 1080p and 2K resolution and the quality difference even with like high settings on 1080p versus low settings on 1440p, I really think that Counter-Strike 2 is really going to push people to move towards a 2K resolution, especially on a 16:9 aspect ratio for those who care to adopt that or who already use it like me, because it's just kind of a good gameplay experience, and once you get used to it, it really isn't like that much of an impact on performance. Yeah, that's the main focus of this video, so I'm going to go over a bunch of settings and then I'll explain 1080p and show you the performance on my system in particular. So these are my main settings that I use when I'm playing Counter-Strike. 2560 by 1440p, which is also 2K resolution, and that is on a 16:9 aspect ratio and widescreen on a 27-inch monitor. I'm in full screen mode and I have a refresh rate of 480 Hz. And I have a whole video on this monitor if you want to go check that out, but this is probably one of the better monitors that you could have. Now, the caveat to that is playing on 2K resolution is incredibly taxing and incredibly hard on your system, and if you want to do it reliably in this game, it's going to take quite a bit. But I'll go over all that in a little bit, and if it wasn't playable, I would not be doing it, but there's a lot of justification for it I'll go over at the end of the video. But overall, this looks a million times better than 1080p with very minimal performance difference. So for my video settings, I use boost player contrast on disabled, I have VSync on disabled, I have G-Sync on disabled. I have tried both VSync and G-Sync, and I have found that they increase latency to a noticeable extent. Everybody always claims that it really isn't that noticeable and that you really should use G-Sync or VSync, especially in my use case where I get much lower frames on average, especially during lows, than my refresh rate actually supports. But I've found that it causes a ton of screen flickering and a lot of other problems and just general latency that makes me play worse. So even though I have terrible screen tearing at times, with the amount of frames that I'm seeing and the refresh rate that my PC has, I genuinely don't notice the frame tears unless I am actually watching the recording afterward. And it feels like it's just a lot better overall. Like, yeah, G-Sync feels smoother noticeably when I use variable refresh on my monitor, but the random flashes of white light from the flickering that have no way to be fixed, because this monitor does have anti-flicker, but overall the anti-flicker feature just doesn't work the way it should, and it lowers your refresh rate to a crazy low point and just makes everything unplayable. Essentially, anti-flicker is useless, so you're going to see these constant flickering things, especially when you're using the scoreboard or you're in the menu or you're pressing escape. You'll see these flickers of bright white light, and it'll even happen when you're playing the game too, and there's no way to fix it. So everybody recommends using VSync and G-Sync, but there's the white light flashes that are super disorienting and kind of annoying, and then on top of that you do have just a horrible gameplay experience as far as performance goes. It might feel better, but it feels better for me to do better at the game than to have a placebo effect or a filter over something. It's like filtering a bad quality image rather than just like cleaning your lens or taking the steps to actually fix the problem. You're just applying a filter to it, and it's pretty ironic that that's what Valve is doing currently, but I don't agree with it, and I don't think that you should either. I would stay away from variable refresh rate, VSync, and G-Sync unless the alternative is genuinely unplayable for you. Test it out, form your own opinion. Obviously, don't just go off of what I say, but I have found that I played worse when using VSync and G-Sync, and that it just genuinely is not that much better, and that the latency added is actually pretty impactful. NVIDIA reflex latency, I feel like there might be a misconception about how this works essentially, so I read through the whole like blurb it gives you, and I've done all the research on it that NVIDIA says, but then I read something from another person who claimed to be like technically savvy, and they said putting this to enable binds it to your CPU, while putting it to enable plus boost binds it to your GPU. And because Counter-Strike 2 is a GPU bound game specifically, and my GPU is definitely getting pushed to the limit playing on a 2K resolution in this game that already is taxing it when I have a 460 Ti, I have found that putting it to enabled for me is the most consistent overall. Those are the only settings that kind of extend out of game to any extent, so the rest of the settings are pretty much going to be only in game specifically, and these ones are technically in-game, but they do have some caveats and tie-ins to external settings on your monitor or NVIDIA and things like that. And eventually I might make a video on those, but I'll talk about that at the end of the video. And then I have my maximum FPS in-game and in-menu set to 1000 and 1000. That is one of the main sub-points of this video and the main settings changes that I found to be impactful, and I'll go over why I use 1000 and why I think a lot of people should use 1000 depending on their like setup and their constraints and everything, but I've just found 1000 to be a million times better than putting it to 0 or at your refresh rate or anything else, so I'll explain that in a little bit. Obviously, current video values preset is going to be custom. This will change if you change anything, and you definitely should change a lot of these. So to begin with, MSAA or multi-sampling anti-aliasing mode is set to none, and I'll go over why that's very, very important pretty soon too. That is another main subpoint of this video, but I have it set to none. And I have global shadow quality on low, and then I have dynamic shadows on sun only. And like boost player contrast, having dynamic shadows on sun only is controversial to some people, but overall I have yet to see an instance where somebody could see a shadow that I have not been able to see. So bear that in mind and just be aware of that. I mean, it seems like a lot of people are claiming you need to have dynamic shadows on the other option, but I found that putting anything up, especially certain ones in particular, including boost player contrast and dynamic shadows, didn't really give me any benefit, but it just degraded my performance by a little bit. And while it doesn't really matter during like my average FPS or nothing going on, for my lows it definitely has more of an impact. So I've just found to have it on sun only is actually just better overall. Model texture detail on low, and then texture filtering mode on bilinear, and then shader detail on low, and particle detail on low. Having all of these to low on 2K resolution looks a million times better than having everything set to the highest possible thing on 1080p. And I'll go over that comparison later in the video, but even if you put everything as low as it physically can go, like I have it here, apart from Fidelity FX, you're going to have a much better visual experience and it's going to look incredible. Then I have ambient occlusion on disabled, and then I have high dynamic range on performance. And then for Fidelity FX Super Resolution, this is one of the settings that you actually need to have on disabled highest quality, unless you want to have a very grainy, terrible experience. It is arguably one of the most important settings apart from resolution. So I would not recommend changing it unless you are physically constrained by your PC to the point that you have to change it for any FPS gain. It will make your visual quality much, much worse. I would recommend going to 4:3 or changing your aspect ratio and resolution before you change the setting. Another weird thing that goes on is if I have another window open on my second or third monitor, especially if I'm just projecting my screen to OBS, I have found that I get weird FPS drops, and for some reason minimizing it actually fixes that pretty much perfectly. Like, you can have 2-3 programs open in the background like I often do, and as long as they are minimized, it seems to have like a pretty decent performance. So I recommend minimizing any windows in the background on your second monitor, and for the most part, if you're just in Discord calls and things like that, you really don't need to have another window open. If you're running like a stream like I am sometimes, I recommend getting another device or another way to look at things apart from your main PC, because Counter-Strike is an incredibly taxing game, and the less that you have open in the background, the better. And that's in conjunction with the fact that for some reason having another window open on your second monitor seems to pretty much break everything. So even if it's a small FPS impact, I would recommend trying it for yourself and seeing the difference. You might be pretty impressed by the difference. Now for the next fix, this one is also pretty important. I found that sometimes I'll load into the game and go into like a workshop map, and the game just looks really, really stuttery and weird, and you can check all of your settings, you can do all these things, and it seems like there really isn't a solution. And this isn't something I encountered until I went to a higher refresh rate monitor with the higher resolution. I found that putting your refresh rate down to the second highest point below your highest refresh rate that you normally have it set at will actually like fix this for a second and make everything more playable, and then if you put it back to the actual point it's supposed to be at, it'll fix it completely. If you have a bad PC, I don't recommend doing this in game obviously, but if you have a decent PC at all, you can probably do it in game. That's the way that I prefer to do it. However, just be careful with that, and if you need to do it in the menus, I think it should work the same. However, if you go into a non-taxing workshop map, your game shouldn't crash unless your PC is very constrained. Alright, so now I'm going to go over multi-sampling anti-aliasing mode. So as you can see here, I have it on 2x, and even in this stream that has a much lower frame rate, you can already see the difference physically in just the playback, right? Obviously when I'm playing on a super high frame rate that I can't record at, it looks much different, and it makes it so much choppier and unplayable, and that's in a workshop map. So in an actual map with like other things going on, other players shooting and everything else, like the tracers, the Molotov flames, the smokes, everything, it has a huge impact. So here's me putting it to none and having more utility out and spraying more and waiting longer, and still it is just not affecting my FPS at all. There's a caveat to this though, and that is that your tracers will look a little bit blurrier, especially if you're on a 2K resolution. It might not be noticeable on 1080p, but the sparks definitely are from shooting helmets when you're in the workshop maps, especially because you're paying more attention. You'll notice all the sparks and general effect quality is definitely like lower, especially with the tracers and, you know, the helmet sparks, but overall you'll probably get used to it eventually like I have, and the trade-off is not worth it at all. Unless you have a supercomputer that never gets those drops for some reason, or you have some kind of GPU technology that I don't have that makes you able to utilize MSAA effectively in this game, I would not recommend using MSAA at all. Regardless of what your specs are, really, it just looks a little bit better, but overall you can get used to the tracers being a little lower, and your lows are going to be much less significant and just much more consistent. And that's really worth it because a lot of the time the instances that actually matter in game are when you're getting shot at, when you're shooting people, and when there's a lot of things going on. You know, all the utility and tracers from executing a site or from defending a site hit seem to impact everything the most, obviously, because that's a lot of things happening in a map. To have any degradation or inconsistency to your computer's quality or performance is just not worth it whatsoever. Definitely recommend changing that. That is very, very important. The next fix is going to be capping your frame rate in-game and in menus. So there's a lot of misconceptions about this, and it might just be my use case in particular with my setup and my specs and my resolution and everything else, but I don't really have any temperature or power constraints with my system, and that's a whole other video for another day with the quality of computer cases and cooling and things, but not going to talk about that right now. I don't really have any problems with temperature or power or anything else, so I'm pretty much good there. And the interesting part is when I cap my frame rate, despite having no constraints, it seems to actually give me a worse average FPS overall, as well as making my flows much more significant and making the overall experience more choppy. It isn't just that my average FPS is being offset by the fact that I'm having much higher peaks because I'm not capping it. It is entirely based on the fact that it just generally lowers something in the game and constrains something that makes everything play pretty much worse. I'm guessing that's because the function of capping FPS in this game, the way that they're dictating it, might be specifically pointed at people who have temperature and power constraints, but if you're like me and you have a decent setup and you're not really worried about temperature and power, I would highly recommend capping at 1000. I tried capping at 0, which is completely uncapped, and for some reason that was much worse as well. Yeah, I recommend definitely capping at 1000 and then just trying out different things, but at 718 it does look a little bit better. However, overall, 1000 is definitely the way that I prefer to play the game entirely. Next up, we have the obligatory 1080p change. You know, obviously I play on 1080p for a lot of my life, and I don't really think it matters that much, but after changing it to 2K resolution CS2, it seems like 1080p just looks significantly worse than CS2 for some reason, so I'm on 2K resolution, obviously I prefer 2K resolution, and to go to 1080p now, it just looks pretty terrible. In the recording, it probably doesn't look that much different, but for me personally playing the game and looking at my monitor, it's pretty night and day, and it's really weird with 1080p, so yeah, I do get a more consistent frame rate overall with the same, you know, low settings set. And so it's interesting how even on 1080p, when I put the refresh rate to 480, my average FPS is lower and it feels much worse. And then I changed it to 1000 there, as you can see, and it just gets instantly better. It's very interesting, very niche, but it is a real thing that occurs, so just be wary of that and be, you know, just be vigilant of that and try to be like changing things as needed and test it out for yourself. Don't just take my word for it, but if you want to, make sure that you protect your computer. Don't make any changes that are going to harm it. But yeah, my average FPS is much higher, and then my lows are much lower, and the game feels much more responsive, even on 1080p with an uncapped refresh rate, so I recommend doing that as well, even on 1080p. A lot of these changes you can apply to 1080p actually. But the main justification for this video was why I play on 2K versus 1080p, and that is because the actual visual quality that you're getting from 2K resolution is so much more substantial, even if you have both settings on low. I mean, obviously 1080p is going to perform much better because it's effectively a lot lower of a resolution, right? But in a game that is focused on FPS primarily, I've always cared more for FPS and tried to be not caring so much about visual quality and those kind of things. However, the trade-off between 2K resolution and 1080p is so substantial that I can't even compare the two. Even if I put everything on high on 1080p and I put everything on low on 2K resolution or 1440p, I can't even compare the two. 1440p still blows it out of the water by miles, and it's going to play much better than having everything on and on high and everything else. I think this game might be soft-coded or intended to be played on 2K resolution, because when I used to play Counter-Strike Go, I would use a combination of settings that would make the game look very good on 1080p, and would also be, you know, very playable as well. But it seems like in this game, for me to get anywhere near the same visual quality, or at least a standardized visual quality, I need to play on 2K resolution with everything set to low, and then my performance is going to be very good compared to my 1080p performance, right? So unless you are playing on a 24-inch monitor where it's much less noticeable, or you have a very outdated PC, I highly recommend going with 2K resolution if your monitor supports it. And bear that in mind too when you're actually purchasing your monitor, because there's a lot of 1080p monitors still being sold, and it just seems like as time is going on that it's going to be something that actually is kind of important. So just bear that in mind, and that is the justification for why I play on a 2K resolution versus a 1K resolution. That's 1440p versus 1080p. That's the majority of the fixes that I went over, obviously. There's a lot of other things that I've changed with my system as far as like BIOS settings, Windows settings, hardware changes, hardware settings in particular, drivers, so many different things that I've done to try to optimize my PC to be able to play this game somewhat effectively, and it is just so much to go over in a single video. I could definitely do it, but a lot of those settings that I have made are kind of unique to my circumstance, right? Like there's a lot of Windows 10 tweaks that rely on like registry edit and things that people don't want to mess with, and overall it just makes sense to not delve into things you don't really want to mess with. But there's also people who have different hardware constraints, different hardware in general. They're on Windows 11, they're on just different operating systems. Like there's so many different things that are unique to me that ultimately the only way for you to ever have the best performance of your system is to know what you're doing and remember to make the changes yourself, because even if you make changes sometimes they revert. You need to know what setting or what piece of hardware is impacting things in your system. And again, not everybody wants just to have the best performance in games like these. Some people like to have tons of things running in the background and an incredibly unoptimized performance because they don't really care for the difference, and they're of the mindset of people who think that a threshold of something is good enough, like playing at 144 frames is good enough, playing at 60 frames is good enough. And everybody's gonna have their own opinion on that, obviously, but as time goes on, it has been proven that, you know, there really isn't a limitation to what people can perceive based on what people dictate. Just because you say somebody can only see 60 frames a second doesn't make that true. Just because you can see 60 frames a second doesn't make that true. Just because everybody could physically see X number of frames per second doesn't mean that they won't have a subconscious noticeable difference between one thing and the other that isn't just placebo, and it can be actually identifiable. So just wanted to go over that. I mean, it's like a very niche thing obviously for some people, but for anyone playing this game, I think they understand why I'm trying to find the good middle ground between performance, FPS, and visual quality. There's a lot of Reddit threads going over a lot of the problems that I've gone over, and a lot of the time they come up without a solution. So I thought I'd share some of these to some people out there who might be going through some similar things, because I've seen a lot of people just straight up quit this game over these issues because it just is not the same and requires a lot more optimization and fixes that people just aren't used to using. And I think a lot of people aren't even giving 2K resolution an effort or a try because they just believe that it will not be worth it and their computer can't handle it. But I mean, I'm running a 460 Ti and a Ryzen 7 5800X3D and an AM4 motherboard with 64 megabytes of RAM. 64 gigabytes of RAM. So even though I've done a lot of changes and things to make my computer optimized, you don't need a crazy highest quality in the world supercomputer to run this game at a super high frame rate and 2K resolution. And a lot of people don't really, you know, care to know that or have taken the time to know that, and a lot of people have quit. So I think that it's important to go over these things and spread this information through the community so people can, you know, obviously have a better experience and enjoy the game. But this is also how things like change happen and how Valve will actually fix things over time and, you know, give everybody a better experience. And that's kind of what we're all going for if you care about the game at all. You want the game to be playable and good. You want a good experience like playing Counter-Strike. It's not about, you know, shitting on people or being a bully or anything else. It's about good sportsmanship and having a competitive playing ground. It's not about having a competitive edge. It's just about having the same thing everybody else wants. And that's a big reason why I made this channel and why I'm trying to make videos. I like giving people the same playing ground and the same advice that everybody should have. A lot of times when it comes to settings, hardware, anything like that, people get very weird and they want to keep it to themselves, or, you know, people don't want to intrude or offend other people, so they're afraid to express their opinions to their friends even. And it's just something that you should always try to consider and optimize and make better. And as long as everybody has the same understanding and we genuinely get to a point where everybody has a good experience and performance, then we actually have a good game. And that's what makes the game quality better. That's what gets rid of a lot of the people who are stupid and mean and rude. And that's what makes everybody just enjoy the game. I miss Counter-Strike Go a lot for that reason, because it was just much better sportsmanship, much better intentioned people who just wanted to play the game and get better at it and have camaraderie and, you know, enjoy being good together. Whether that's on your team, especially now, it's hard to even find that, but also on the enemy team, you know, like there's a lot less nice shots happening and a lot less compliments, but that's partially due to cheaters and everything else, right? So there's a lot of other problems that are going to subsist and happen, but you make the changes that you can, and then hopefully, as long as Valve doesn't want to ruin their game or hates us as a community, they'll make their changes that they can too, right? That's all we can really hope for. So that's part of why I made this channel, and that's why I made this video. I just want to help people. This is a little bit different of a video, obviously, because it's focused on a game, and a lot of my other videos just focus on like hardware and technology and products and things like that, but this is definitely something pretty important that ties into those, and my entire goal for this channel and why I started like making videos again and why I came back to YouTube after deleting my whole channel. So I hope this helps somebody. I hope this like actually encourages people to come back to the game or have a more enjoyable experience at least. And yeah, I think it's definitely worth it to consider a lot of these aspects that I brought up, whether it's resolution, particular settings, or just overall mindset or mentality. I have a lot of other videos that you can check out on some hardware and some products and things like that that could improve your performance or your overall quality of life or health. But yeah, definitely check those out if you feel like doing that. But overall, like, the main point of this video was to talk about Counter-Strike 2 and trying to get it to a playable point and enjoy the most out of it. That's pretty much everything I wanted to go over in this video. It covered all the settings changes, the 2K resolution, some perspective and opinions that I have, why I make videos overall in the first place, and some other things too. So I touched on everything that I wanted to, and I hope this video was helpful to you as far as settings go. If you're still watching to this point, I'm pretty impressed because I've kind of gone off the whole topic that I was considering from the first place, but I hope this does actually help some people out there, because that is really what I want to do with this channel and these videos. There's something to be said about longevity and success and all those things, and life can go in so many directions. It's good to succeed in whatever you try to do, but overall you never know what's going to happen, so I think it's important to try to do some good and do your best, right? Anyway, I'm rambling, so thank you guys for watching the video. I hope you have a good day, and I appreciate you stopping by. Thanks.